Thank you, Aaron. Hello, and a very warm welcome. It's great to be back with the Momentum community for the Minds and Machines webinar. I'm Dr. Thomas Oberlechner, founder of Behavior Quant, and I'm truly delighted you're joining us today. This isn't just a webinar. It's a chance to dive into a topic I've been passionate about for years, combining the power of human psychology with advanced technology to create something new and impactful. And as we go through today's session, I invite you to reflect on your own practice and how this might reshape it. My vision is to give financial professionals like you a fresh perspective on your clients, rooted in understanding how people think and behave and how they make decisions. So, coming from Vienna, the city of Sigmund Freud, I was trained as a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist here. So psychology is always close by for me. I've spent my career researching how people make decisions, especially in financial contexts. I was a psychology professor for many years, and my work has taken me from Harvard and MIT to top investment firms on Wall Street and even into Silicon Valley, building advanced technology for investors. Throughout these experiences, one lesson has stood out. Empathy is the cornerstone of effective relationships. Truly seeing the world through a client's eyes, understanding their feelings and perspective is crucial for building trust and for advising financial clients successfully. And I'm sure many of you have seen how even small acts of empathy can transform a client conversation. Many advisors still rely on gut feeling or traditional risk questionnaires. But is that enough in today's fast-changing world? So what does that look like when applied with real clients? At Behavior Quant, we've developed a science-based system that helps you understand your clients on a much deeper level, personalize your advice, and build deeper trust-based relationships. In this presentation, I'll draw on my background as a psychology professor and share key insights from psychology and behavioral finance. From advanced risk profiling to personality traits, decision-making style, mitigating advisor biases, and personalizing portfolio theory, I want to show you how the newest behavioral technology applies this research to help you build more trust and to personalize advice much more systematically. All the science, all the tech we'll discuss ultimately serves to help you understand your clients better, to truly see things from their perspective. So let's start with something you already know well, but look at it through a different lens. Risk profiling is a core part of every investment recommendation. New behavioral technology approaches it with far more depth and scientific rigor than the usual questionnaire. Many studies show that traditional risk questionnaires are too simplistic, underscoring the need for scientific tools. Our behavioral system recognizes that behind every risk score is a human being with unique feelings about uncertainty and loss. The result is a far more nuanced and reliable risk profile than the old one-dimensional what's your risk number approach. Traditional methods rely on a few generic questions to produce a single risk score. Our system takes it further using a mix of proven psychometric scales and realistic financial decision scenarios to fine-tune the results. This scientific approach cross-checks what clients say about risk with how they actually respond in trade-off situations, reducing measurement errors. And I know many of you have used risk questionnaires for years. Let's see how this new approach compares. Often, people misjudge their risk comfort until they're faced with a tangible financial situation. The system simulates those decisions up front to get a truer read. For example, a client might rate themselves as cautious and conservative when it comes to investing. But when faced with an actual financial scenario, like choosing between a guaranteed profit and a gamble for a bigger gain, that same client might go for the gamble. And this reveals a higher risk appetite in practice than the survey answers alone suggested. Behavioral science technology makes these inconsistencies immediately clear and adjusts the risk score accordingly. Research also shows that separating risk into two components is crucial. Risk tolerance, the client's psychological willingness to take risk, and risk capacity, the client's financial ability to take risk. For example, their income stability or the time horizon for an investment. Measuring both risk tolerance and capacity is crucial. If someone's tolerance is high, but capacity is low, that mismatch is a major red flag. So you might recognize a client situation like this. It's more common than you think. An advisor once labeled a client, John, as aggressive because John said he was comfortable with risk and he loved talking about volatile stocks. But the system's behavioral assessment revealed that while John's risk tolerance was high, his capacity was low. He was near retirement with little cushion for losses. This profile made the advisor pause, and when they discussed the findings, John admitted the 2008 market crash had scarred him more than he let on. They decided to keep his portfolio growth-oriented, but to add safety nets due to his limited capacity. And the advisor realized without measuring both tolerance and capacity, he might have misjudged John and placed him in a portfolio that was too risky. The behavioral risk profiling module pulls these insights together. It clearly distinguishes risk tolerance, personality, from risk capacity, financial ability. You get separate results for each, along with an integrated risk score that combines them. And crucially, it flags any major mismatch. If a client's willingness to take risk far exceeds their ability to afford it, you'll get an alert to address that gap. The system then links the profile to portfolio recommendations. It can pull up a model portfolio that matches the client's profile, complete with stats and worst-case scenarios. And this creates a smooth transition from profiling to concrete investment advice. This advanced approach pays off for both advisors and clients. For advisors, it provides a much more accurate read on a client's risk profile, making your investment recommendations more likely to be suitable and accepted. It reduces the chance of nasty surprises. A client saying, "I didn't realize I could lose this much," or "These returns are too low for me." Because the profile accounts for both psychology and finances, you can have much more nuanced conversations. For example, you might say, "I know you're comfortable with risk, but since you'll retire soon, we should dial it back." For clients, this process protects them from themselves. It can reveal if they're overestimating their risk appetite or if they could afford to take on more risk. They see that you're being thorough and scientific, which boosts their confidence. In short, advanced risk profiling leads to portfolios that are better aligned with each client's comfort. And clients are more likely to stay the course during market volatility, and you are less likely to have to do damage control later. Now let's move into one of my favorite topics, personality. The Big Five model of personality: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. This is psychology's gold standard framework for describing fundamental personality differences. Why does this matter in financial advice? Because these core traits influence how people make financial decisions, from how impulsively or cautiously someone invests to how emotionally they react to market swings. In other words, knowing someone's personality gives you a window into their mindset, a structured way to understand their unique nature with empathy. And research shows the big five traits strongly impact financial behavior and reliably describe personality. For example, a 2024 study found that knowing somebody's big five traits and their decision-making style helps predict their investment choices and their portfolio outcomes. So in plain terms, if you understand a client's personality, you can better anticipate that client's financial decisions and needs. Now, while the big five is an excellent foundation, it's important that it's still just a starting point. As a former professor and researcher in personality psychology, I should also mention the so-called bandwidth fidelity trade-off. Broad traits, like the big five, provide great coverage, but finer nuances can be lost. So in plain English, no single model captures a person completely, and that's why BQ Advisory builds on the big five, but doesn't stop there. It incorporates additional traits for a richer, more faithful picture of each client. Think about your own clients for a moment. Do these profiles remind you of anyone? Alice is high in conscientiousness. She's organized and future-oriented. Bob is high in extroversion. He's outgoing and excitement-seeking. If you present the same complex financial plan to both, Alice will likely read every detail because she craves structure. And Bob, on the other hand, might lose interest if you go too deep. He'll prefer a big picture overview. The big five explains these differences, so you don't mistakenly label one client as difficult. Alice's love of detail comes from her conscientious nature, not from nitpicking. And Bob's need for broad strokes comes from his extroverted nature, not because he isn't serious about the details. One of the advisors using the behavioral profiling system discovered that one of his long-term clients was very low in emotional stability, meaning he had a strong tendency to worry about losses. And this explained why during past market dips, the client would call in a panic. So the advisor adjusted his approach ahead of the next market downturn. He reached out proactively with extra reassurance and with a reminder of the long-term plan before the client could panic. The result? The client stayed calm and kept his investments on track, a big change from his past reactions. The advisor even joked that it was like having a user manual for the client. So knowing the client's personality helped him anticipate and meet the client's emotional needs under stress. Our behavioral system goes beyond a generic risk score or a simple conservative aggressive label. Instead, it produces a rich behavioral profile. It distills complex traits into memorable personality types, like prudent guardian or efficient manager. And these aren't just labels, they are tools to spark meaningful dialogue. And that way you can discuss personality in a relatable manner without oversimplifying. And you still see detailed traits behind those labels. For instance, if a client's profile shows very low openness, you know that they probably avoid complex novel investments and prefer safe and familiar options. These insights help you anticipate how different clients may react in various situations. And all these insights have tangible benefits. For advisors, understanding what makes each client tick means you can truly personalize your advice. For example, a highly conscientious client will appreciate a detailed checklist or action plan, while an extroverted client might prefer face-to-face interactions and a big picture discussion. Clients, in turn, feel genuinely understood, not squeezed into a generic box. And when a client feels the advisor truly gets them, it builds trust. In fact, a 2022 CFA Institute study found that clients valued trust in their advisor even more than investment performance. So by leveraging Big Five insights, you can tailor your approach to each client's personality and build trust and rapport more effectively. Not all investors make decisions the same way. Decision science shows there's a wide spectrum of styles. Some people are fast, intuitive decision makers who rely on gut instinct, while others are slow, analytical thinkers who deliberate carefully over data. You've likely worked with both ends of the spectrum and everyone in between. Additionally, some individuals are naturally very confident in their choices, whereas others are more hesitant and constantly seek reassurance. Knowing where each client falls on this spectrum, intuitive versus analytical, quick versus deliberate, confident versus cautious, helps you tailor advice so it truly resonates. And this is another area where empathy matters. You understand how each client makes decisions, and you make sure you're speaking their language. Imagine you're pitching the same investment to two different clients. Client X goes with their heart. As soon as you start explaining the opportunity, they latch onto the story and say, I have a good feeling about this. Client Y decides with their head. They interrupt to ask for hard numbers, the 10-year performance, the fees, all the details. So the same presentation triggers completely different responses. If you recognize early on that client X is the intuitive type, you would lead with a compelling narrative and big picture outcomes to keep them engaged. For client Y, who's more analytical, you'd bring plenty of data and maybe an appendix of figures for them to dig into. It's a clear reminder one size doesn't fit all, and research backs this up. Studies consistently show that aligning your advice delivery with the client's decision-making style, both their understanding and decision quality improve. For example, one study found that intuitive decision makers felt more confident and they were more likely to follow advice when it was presented through stories and scenarios. Analytical types, on the other hand, did better when the same advice was given with statistics and charts. But if you mismatch the style, say you overwhelm an intuitive client with spreadsheets, or you give an analytical client nothing but feel-good stories, you risk causing confusion, discomfort, or even distrust. Here's a quick real-life example. It's a case that really shows how decision style plays out in real life. An advisor I know worked with a married couple who had opposite decision styles. One spouse was big picture and intuitive, while the other spouse was very detailed focused. Before using the behavioral system, their meetings were challenging. One spouse got impatient with too many details, while the other felt uneasy without enough specifics. So after profiling them with the system, the advisor understood why. And he adjusted his approach, giving the big picture spouse visual summaries and the detailed orient spouse plenty of numbers and documentation. And it worked. Both spouses felt at ease and could finally agree on a plan. And the advisor was relieved to finally understand their styles and could tailor his process accordingly. So how does BQ Advisory help with this? As part of its assessment, BQ asks questions and uses exercises that reveal each client's decision-making style. And armed with this insight, you can adjust your approach accordingly and think of BQ as your roadmap for how to present information to that client so they can make decisions comfortably. Paying attention to decision style is a game changer for advisors. It not only prevents miscommunication, like drowning a client in details they don't want, or leaving out details an analytical client really needs, it also boosts client satisfaction. You're giving people information in the way they want to receive it. And that means they understand the reasoning more clearly, and they will remember it better. And when a client understands the plan, they feel more confident and empowered, and they're more likely to stay with the course of action that you've recommended. In the end, aligning with each client's decision style leads to better outcomes for everyone. The client feels, wow, my advisor really speaks my language, which strengthens the bond between you and makes it much easier for them to say yes to your recommendations. Now let's take a quick look at how behavioral technology helps advisors gain a more holistic view of their clients. It supports even the most experienced advisors in recognizing and correcting for common psychological biases. So let me ask, have you ever caught yourself assuming a client thinks just like you do? There's two major biases that can derail how we understand clients. The first is the forced consensus bias, assuming others see the world the same way as we do. The second is the halo effect, where one standout trait, like confidence or intelligence, distorts your perception of the whole person. These pitfalls show why objective, multidimensional profiling is so valuable. It helps you go beyond gut instinct and see the full picture. The everyone is like me trap happens when an advisor unconsciously projects their own preferences onto a client. You might think, if I'm comfortable with this plan, the client will be too. Even experienced professionals fall into this bias. Expertise doesn't guarantee objectivity. That's where tools like BQ Advisory make a difference. Take Karen, an advisor who learned this the hard way. Cautious by nature, she assumed a young entrepreneur client shared her conservative approach. But when later he pushed for bold, aggressive investments, it became clear her instincts had been off. After using BQ Advisory, the truth emerged. The client was a natural risk taker. Karen's own risk lens had distorted her judgment. And the client admitted he had actually downplayed his answers early on, sensing her conservative vibe and not wanting to seem reckless. The result? A misalignment that could have been avoided. Objective, data-driven insights would have revealed his true preferences from the start, leading to better advice and a stronger relationship. And now consider the halo effect, the assumption that one trait tells you everything about a person. For example, a brilliant surgeon might be assumed to be a naturally savvy, calm investor. But excelling in medicine does not guarantee financial know-how or steady nerves in a volatile market. So leaning on that assumption could lead an advisor to skip key questions or to misjudge the client's true risk comfort. A multidimensional profile reveals a more complete picture. It might show that, despite his high intellect, this client has low financial confidence and actually high anxiety about his losses, requiring a very different approach than the initial guess. Behavioral technology helps neutralize both of these biases by offering an impartial, data-driven view of the client. Instead of guessing, the system gives you a comprehensive profile, covering key factors like risk tolerance, personality, decision-making style, and more. It provides concrete metrics that anchor your advice in facts, showing where a client stands relative to others. And if your intuition conflicts with the data, that might be a red flag. You might have a blind spot. So how does this translate into your daily practice? The benefits of objective client profiling are significant. For advisors, it means more precise recommendations and fewer mistakes. You can confidently say, this isn't just my opinion, it's backed by your profile data, which makes your advice more persuasive. It also safeguards your practice by avoiding recommendations that fall outside the client's true comfort zone, so no unpleasant surprises down the road. And it allows you to personalize at scale instead of relying on a one-size-fits-all approach. For clients, the advice feels tailored to who they really are. They feel heard because the plan reflects their unique traits, not a generic formula. The process itself is enlightening. Clients might realize how risk-averse they actually are, or why one part of them craves big gains, while another one worries about losses. And seeing these insights builds trust, and knowing the strategy truly reflects them makes them more confident and more likely to stay the course through market ups and downs. In short, both of these biases point to a bigger theme. To truly understand each client, we must step outside our own perspective. Using an objective, multidimensional tool combined with genuine empathy helps you move past personal bias and avoid one-dimensional judgments. The result? A tighter alignment between the plan and the person, and a more trust-filled, effective advisor-client relationship. So we've explored a lot of behavioral insights. Now let's connect them back to the finance side. Let's pull it all together. This is where finance meets real human behavior. This final section brings together the rigor of investment science with the reality of how people make decisions. Our system is designed to bridge these two worlds. And the key to that bridge is empathy, making sure the human element is never lost in the financial strategy. On one side, we have the time-tested principles of modern portfolio theory, concepts like diversification, the efficient frontier, and risk-return trade-offs. On the other, we have the human side, how people actually feel about risk and reward, and how they behave in real-life situations. The goal is to make sure that the optimal portfolio on paper is also optimal for the person who has to stick with it. Because the best portfolio means nothing if the client can't sleep at night or abandons the strategy at first sign of trouble. And that's why empathy is so crucial here. You need to anticipate how the client feels about risk, not just to calculate what the numbers are, to ensure the plan truly fits. Here's a practical story that really drives this point home. Consider two advisors. Advisor A uses the traditional approach, while advisor B uses the behavioral system. Advisor A gives the client a standard risk tolerance questionnaire and, based on the results, puts them in a typical moderate portfolio. He explains the choice, maybe by historical average returns, volatility, maybe a standard deviation chart. The client nods politely, but you can tell they're a bit uneasy. Those stats don't mean much to them emotionally. And later, when the market drops by about 15%, a fairly normal downturn, and the portfolio falls by around 10%, the client panics. Calls advisor A saying, "I never thought I could lose this much so fast." And the advisor is left with a very upset client and a difficult conversation. Nothing unusual happened, but the client never understood what a moderate risk level really meant in practice. Now let's look at advisor B. With a similar client, they use the behavioral system to assess risk. Instead of handing over a number or a generic moderate label, advisor B sits down and walks through a chart from the BQ report. This chart shows the historical performance of the recommended portfolio, including real-world scenarios, like the worst drawdown over different time horizons. And when the client sees this, for example, worst year minus 25%, they frown, and that opens up a frank conversation. How would you feel if that happened again? What would you do? The client responds, "Actually, that sounds scary. I didn't realize a moderate portfolio could drop that much in a bad year." And together they decide to dial the risk down, shifting to a slightly more conservative allocation that the client feels comfortable with. It's a perfect example of how combining financial and psychological insight leads to a much better client experience, one that is built on clarity and shared understanding. So how does the behavioral system integrate these two sides? finance science, and human psychology. If you're wondering how this actually comes together in the system, this is it. On the technical side, PQ includes model portfolios aligned with a range of risk profiles backed by decades of historical market data. When you input a client's profile, the system pulls up a matching portfolio complete with expected returns, volatility, and key downside metrics like maximum drawdown. It presents this information with intuitive charts and clear client-friendly explanations, so it's easy to share the highlights with the client. And on the behavioral side, the system uses the client's unique inputs, all those factors we've been profiling, like personality, risk tolerance, decision style, to fine-tune the recommendations. So in essence, PQ ensures that personalization never comes at the cost of sound investment principles. Every portfolio recommendation is evidence-based and it's grounded in data. So you're still aligned with diversification or risk standards. But it's also tailored to fit the individual client. Another practical advantage, the system generates documentation you can use to justify your recommendations. This is great for compliance purposes. You can show that the plan is based on the client's own profile data and historical analysis, not some whimsical guess. And here's why the approach makes your advice more powerful and your conversations more persuasive. Blending finance science with behavioral insight creates real value both for advisors and for clients. For advisors, it's efficient, it builds confidence. The system gives you clear, ready-to-use talking points. You can say, at your risk level, the worst one-year loss was about X%, and that's within your comfort zone. That shifts the conversation from, I think this works for you, to here's why this fits you, and here's what you can expect. It makes your advice feel stronger, more convincing, both for clients and for prospects. And because modern portfolio theory is built in, you're working within professional standards while still tailoring your guidance. Clients get the best of both worlds, a rational, goal-based strategy that also matches their comfort zone. And when they understand the logic behind the plan, they feel more at ease and are less likely to panic when markets dip. Instead of saying, I didn't see this coming, they can say, we planned for this. Thank you so much for being here today. Over the past few minutes, we've explored the science of personalized advice, from modern personality theory and decision-making science to advanced risk profiling. And we've seen how behavioral technology makes it possible to deliver truly personalized advice and recommendations tailored to each individual client. I hope you find this bridge between finance and human psychology both inspiring and relevant. A 2021 Accenture study of 1,000 wealth advisory clients revealed a clear message. The main issue, 90% said the advice they receive feels too general. And I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard something similar from your own clients. Now contrast that to their top expectation. My advisor understands me as a person. In other words, clients don't just want good financial advice. They want to feel genuinely understood. And a 2023 study by Charles Schwab found something striking. Advisors using behavioral tools saw 3 times larger deposits from existing clients, along with significantly stronger loyalty and higher client acquisition rates. Why? Because clients had a better experience and were more satisfied. So if any part of today's session resonated with you, I invite you to take the next step. You can use this QR code to try out Behavior Quant for free. And of course, feel free to reach out. We are always happy to continue the conversation. Thank you again for being part of this journey. And now I'll hand it back to our host, Heaven.